Hi, I'm Ollie Anderson. I'm a transformational coach, and this is a presentation about how to cultivate discipline in your life. What I want to do is dive deep down to the fundamental cause of this problem, i.e., a lack of discipline. So many people try to transform their lives, try to change their lives, but they get stuck because their desires and their intentions are out of alignment. We'll get into that in more detail in this presentation, but ultimately, what we're going to be talking about is how so many of the things that people think are a lack of discipline and that they try to focus on, like negative self talk and procrastination, stopping and starting, a lack of consistency, and all that kind of stuff, all of those things are ultimately symptoms of the same fundamental problem. And that problem is that your unconscious and conscious mind are out of alignment. They're pointing in different directions, and so you have an inner conflict with yourself where one part of you wants to move in one direction and the other habitual program part of you is pulling you in another. We're going to get into that in more detail, but ultimately, if you want to get results, you need to reconfigure your relationship with yourself so that they're both pointing in the same direction. Only if you do that are you going to be able to stay disciplined in the way that you want to and to get where you want to be. And so, before we get into all the nitty gritty and the details, that is ultimately what you're going to learn in this little presentation slash workshop, whatever you're going to call it. That if you want to get results, you need to work on your unconscious mind and your conscious mind and make sure that they're both pointing in the same direction. If you don't do that, then whatever you try and do is not going to be very successful, probably. What we're going to talk about is this stuff. Why you need discipline to get the life that you want. Why you're struggling to be as disciplined as you know you need to be to get there. We're going to look at a concept that I've been talking about quite a lot recently, which is that you need effort before it becomes effortless. You need force before you can flow. I'm going to look at that through the lens of discipline. I want to talk about some things that you can do or some mental shifts that you can go through so that you can basically program your unconscious mind to get over its habitual ways of doing things. And that's things like this. Let your yes be a yes and your no be a no. Thank you, Jesus, for that one, because that's what he said. Always finish what you start, build incrementally and chip away at it, and then keep the fire burning. Discipline makes you more real, and we're going to talk about how you can use it ultimately to burn away on all the unreal things about you that are holding you back from getting where you want to be. So let's dive right into it. I don't want this to be a massive, super long presentation. I want to punch you in the face, metaphorically speaking, with just information that you can use to get where you're going. So why do you need discipline in the first place? Well, it's quite simple, right? We all know, or we have a loose idea, that if we want to actually get where we're going, then it is going to take some work, but that we need to stick to it. And that's why most people seem to have problems, because these unconscious blocks. The simple definition of discipline that I want to give is that it's a bridge between cause and effect, and it's going to take you where you want to go. The diagram that I like to use, if you've done my free course, the personality transplant thing, you've seen this already, is this idea of closing the gap. So there's a little stick man on one side of the gap and a real, more kind of statuesque Adonis version on the other side. Ultimately, when we get to the other side of this chasm, we're going to be more real. And the only way that we can get there is by putting the systems and the structures in place and living as the cause that is going to allow us to reach the effect of getting to the other side. Discipline is the bridge that is going to carry you across this gap between where you currently stand and where you want to be. Without discipline, there is no way that you're going to get across, because the only way that you can get across is by changing a lot of your habitual ways of thinking, your habitual ways of feeling, your habitual ways of viewing life and relating to yourself and identifying. And it takes discipline to be able to overcome those old patterns and to start acting in a different way. When you can do that, that's when you're going to start becoming a different version of yourself. And you need to do it consistently, otherwise you're never going to get all the way across, and you're just going to constantly be stopping and starting, like I keep saying. There's some common obstacles to discipline that most people tend to focus on when they struggle to be as disciplined as they want to be. All of these things are just symptoms of the fundamental problem, which is this unconscious block or split that I've alluded to, where the unconscious mind is pulling you one direction and your conscious mind is trying to get somewhere else, the unconscious mind is always going to win because it's more powerful than you can possibly imagine. And your conscious mind, if you're just thinking about things, well, it's not going to be connected to action anyway. And so basically, you're just never going to get anywhere. So all of these obstacles to discipline, they just keep you where you are, but might not want to be. Otherwise, why would you want to change? So we're not going to go into all the details of these obstacles, but I just want to point out that if you are dealing with any of these obstacles, then again, sorry to be a broken record, they are all symptoms of this fundamental split within yourself, where your unconscious mind is taking you one direction, your conscious mind is taking you in another. So these are kind of obstacles that people note in their lives: a lack of clear goals, procrastination, distractions, lack of motivation, negative self-talk, poor time management, procrastination, a lack of a routine, low energy, impulsiveness, resistance to change, emotional challenges, lack of consistency, etc. If you're trying to be disciplined in your life, or you've made some attempts at being more disciplined and it hasn't worked out, then the odds are that you've dealt with some of these obstacles or all of them. You can deal with the obstacles in themselves, but ultimately that's just like putting a band-aid on a broken leg, because the fundamental problem is what is causing all of these symptoms to show up in your life. The obstacles are just an extension of this unconscious block that you've got that is pulling you in different directions. And if you can work on the unconscious block, then you'll be more aligned, you'll be more focused, and then you're more likely to be able to move in the direction that you want to move in. So, like I said, these are all symptoms, they're not the fundamental problem. So you can kind of forget about dealing with them and just go straight to the root cause, which is the unconscious block. The real reason that you struggle is because, like I've said, your conscious and unconscious mind want different things, and you're not going to get where you want anywhere until they're on the same page. You can call this sabotage, but really it's just a lack of clarity about what's going on inside you. The process that I always talk about when I'm coaching people is awareness, acceptance, and action. If you raise awareness of what's actually going on inside you at the level of your unconscious mind and your intentions and all that kind of stuff, then you can actually accept it and then you can do something about it. Your conscious mind works on desire, but your unconscious mind works on intention. This is the thing that you need to be aware of to start cracking this open. Your conscious mind works on desire, but your unconscious mind works on intention. A desire is just something that you want. Like, it's just the thing that you're thinking about. You kind of want it, but you're not necessarily committed to it, and you're not necessarily acting on it to the greatest extent possible. If you were, you'd be getting the results that you wanted, and you wouldn't need discipline in the first place. In contrast to that, an intention is something that you're committed to whether you know it or not. That's why these unconscious intentions are so powerful and can pull us in a totally different direction to the one that we think we want to go in. So just to repeat that, your conscious mind works on desire, but your unconscious mind works on intention. And a desire is just something that you want, which doesn't really mean anything, but your intention is something that you're committed to whether you know it or not. And because you're committed to it, you're acting on that predominantly, which is why you can tell yourself one thing at the level of the conscious mind, but then keep pulling yourself in the other direction because of all the unconscious stuff going on beneath the surface, which is ultimately about your old habitual ways of identifying and relating to life. Intention always wins, even if you're not aware of it. This is the key thing. And so if you want to become more disciplined, you need to understand this so that you can actually balance them out. You can make sure that your desires become something that you treat like intentions, and that the intentions that are bubbling away beneath the surface and pulling you in a direction you don't want to go in are something that you can just basically dissolve and abolish, because your desire is transmuted into something that's more powerful, a real intention, and then you're going to be focused on going where you want to go. You can become aware of your unconscious intentions by looking at the results you keep getting but don't desire and reverse engineering them. That sounds complicated maybe, but all it means is that if you look at the results you keep getting in life and you don't want those results, then you can pretty much guarantee that underneath the surface of your ego, your way of identifying and relating to yourself and your conscious understanding of things, there is something going on that is getting you that result that you don't want. Here's a classic example. Yeah, it's a simple example, which is why I'm using it. I'm not being like fat phobic or whatever you call it. It's just a good example of how this works. And so the example is of losing weight. At the level of desire, the conscious mind, people tell themselves, I want to lose weight. It sounds simple. But then they'll go to the gym, then maybe they'll stop going to the gym after like a few sessions, or when they do go to the gym, they don't put the effort in that they know they should. They go to the gym and then they go home and then they stuff their face or whatever it is. Ultimately, the point is they're telling themselves at the level of the conscious mind that they want a certain thing, but it never happens. That's because bubbling away beneath the surface is an unconscious intention. And it could be a variety of different things, but the example I've used here is that bubbling away beneath the surface, they are ultimately telling themselves, because of their unconscious mind, I intend to ease my emotional pain, shame, guilt, and trauma, and food gives me this. And so ultimately, when you weigh it up, this desire that they've got to lose weight is outweighed completely by a stronger intention that they have to run away from their emotional pain and their shame and the bad feelings of worthlessness and all this stuff. And if you don't understand that, well, you're never going to be able to attack that underlying intention and bring the desire up to a higher level so the scales are balanced out in favor of what you really want, rather than just your old programming and conditioning, which is what leads to the unconscious intentions in the first place. It all comes down to your habits. Habits of thought, feeling, action, emotion, anything that you can think of really. All of these things combined create your identity. And ultimately, your identity is just the accumulation of all your unconscious habits, which are your unconscious intentions, basically dictating your life from beneath the surface of whatever else seems to be going on in your conscious mind. If you understand that your unconscious intentions are just a bunch of habits that you've picked up over the years, then when you understand about this scale and how they can balance out, you can consciously start to change your habits so that your desires become more powerful than your intentions. That might sound complicated, but all it really means in practical terms is that you know what you want, you know where you're trying to go, and then you start acting in alignment with your desires so powerfully and with such commitment that the unconscious stuff can't tear you in a different direction, because it's going to dissolve in the light of the direction you start carrying yourself in as you cross that gap, because you're going to implement some stronger, more disciplined habits. The reason you keep getting the results you don't want but intend is because your habits are aligned with those unconscious intentions and not desire. And so the solution, the way to become more disciplined, is to start actively focusing on making your habits aligned with what you desire, so that those desires can eventually become the unconscious intentions. And that's when you go from the state of of putting effort in to effortlessness, when you have unconscious competence. Ultimately, all that means is you're rewiring your relationship with yourself at the level of your habitual ways of relating to yourself, so that by extension, your habits and the way that you do things just naturally is aligned with who you want to be, instead of who you don't want to be, because you're not aware of these unconscious intentions. In short, what you need to do is you need to flip the script. This basically means aligning your habits with your desires, and with enough repetition, they'll become your new unconscious habits and you won't have this inner friction. The reason that you have this inner friction in the first place, and a lack of discipline and procrastination and negative self-talk and all these different symptoms that people experience, is because bubbling away beneath the surface are all of these old habits and these old patterns that you've accumulated over the course of a lifetime, which are a response to whatever emotional stuff you've got going on inside you. And normally that emotional stuff is shame, guilt, and trauma, and it's going to pull you away from trying to make changes in your life, because if you do make changes, you're going to have to face those emotions. And so ultimately, if you want to close the gap, the only way that you can do it is to flip the script in the sense that it says on the slide, by repeating new habits that are aligned with the version of yourself that you want to become. Obviously, if you're suffering from a lack of discipline, then it's going to be hard to keep repeating those habits. But the reason it's hard is because you think that those old patterns and those old ways of being are actually you. What you need to realize is that they're not you. It's just a remnant of your past, basically, blocking you from getting to the future that you want to move into. And if you can become aware of it, you can bring it to the surface and you can see that that's what's going on, then it makes it a million times easier to just keep chipping away at the discipline and getting where you want to be. This is where it comes down to this thing that I keep talking about. This is a concept I've talked about quite a lot recently because it's so important and I just want people to really kind of drill it into their heads. You have to go from putting effort in before you get to this point of effortlessness. You have to force things before you can flow. So ultimately, as it says here, before you can start flowing and building momentum, you literally have to go to war with your unconscious mind. Now, I've just said that to be dramatic. You don't really want to go to war with your unconscious mind because then you're going to be attacking yourself. But you need to accept that those old patterns and those old intentions that are pulling you in that old direction are not real. They're not you. And you need to see them for what they are, which is that they helped you to survive whatever you've been through in the past, but that they're now holding you back. And going to war, putting the effort in, is ultimately just about knowing that if you can change the way that you relate to yourself through the actions that you take, then day by day, you can dissolve those old patterns and replace them with something more real. And when you do that, the unconscious mind and the conscious mind are going to be pointing in a direction that you actually have chosen for them to point in, instead of being a direction that they just point in because of your reaction and automatic responses to whatever you've been through. So the key point there is that your old habits are not you. When you start to change your habits, you start to change your identity, ego. All of the symptoms we talked about earlier aren't you. They're just old habits and patterns trying to keep you in a familiar place. And so ultimately, that is why people lack discipline, because there's this battle going on within them at the level of the unconscious mind that is pulling them back from changing. It doesn't want you to change. At some level, you want to stay the same, which is why any attempts at becoming disciplined, which is always about transforming and changing your life, any attempts to do that are going to be thwarted by this unconscious intention to stay the same. And if you know that, then you can actively work through it and consciously chip away at it, because you know that it's not you. Like anytime you get this negative self-talk trying to talk you out of being disciplined, or anytime you start procrastinating, or anytime you become distracted or whatever, then you know it's just an old pattern trying to hold you back. And I think that awareness is what stops most people from being disciplined, because as soon as that kicks in, that little voice or that niggle or that desire to procrastinate or whatever, they think that's who they are, but it's not who they are. That's who they used to be, and it's holding them back from becoming wherever it is that they're going to next, whoever it is that they're becoming on the other side of that gap. You have to put effort into overcoming those old habits, including the biggest habit of all, maybe even addiction, your identity. We are so used to clinging to a certain version of ourselves and filtering everything through that version of who we think we are, that we find it very difficult to make any changes in our lives, purely because we lack the awareness that it's just an old habit. And like any other habit, you can change it. But to change it, you need consistency, discipline, and focus. And you can do that by just being strategic about making sure that you align your unconscious and conscious mind by tweaking, not even that dramatically, the way that you relate to yourself. If you can do that, that's when you're going to be able to close this gap. But you have to start acting and being is the key word, as if you're the person on the other side of that gap. So the only way you're going to get there is by bringing those qualities to the surface right now, the qualities that you're going to embody on the other side, but also by acting in this habitual way, or starting to cultivate the habits that are going to lead you to being that person. It's ultimately about cause and effect, like I said earlier. Like whatever you do now is the cause of the effect of being on the other side of that gap. You're already engaged in that process. It's not like some abstract thing. Literally everything that you're doing is feeding into that process. And if you understand that, then from moment to moment, you can keep embodying that version of yourself until eventually you're there, and those old habits and all the things that you're trying to be disciplined to escape from no longer hold you back or stop you from being real. You have to put effort into making your desires intentions so that eventually they become new unconscious habits. This is why I say you go from effort to effortless. Right now, the reason that it's hard for you to be disciplined, I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you are struggling with discipline. Right now, the reason it's hard to be disciplined is because it's effortless not to be disciplined, if that makes sense. All of your old habits and ways of relating to yourself and etc, all of that stuff is habitual and it's unconsciously habitual. So you don't have to even put any thought into it. It's not like you have to put thought into not going to the gym or whatever it is that you struggle to do. That is the easy way for you to do things because you've become used to doing it that way. It's just a habit. And the identity that you've created for yourself is an extension of all the habits that keep you in that position. And if you can understand that, then you can look at your desires in the way that we've talked about. So your desire to lose weight or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And then you can basically understand that if you can make that an intention by putting effort and repetition into doing it until it becomes second nature, then that ultimately is going to become your new unconscious habit and it will become effortless. Eventually you get to that point where you don't need discipline. So for me, for example, I work out like every day. At first, I did have to put effort into doing that. Now, like I've been working out for years and years, now I don't even have to think about it. Like I just do it. Like it's pretty much guaranteed that I'm going to work out unless I'm like really sick or something, purely because it's become my new unconscious habit. And so what was once something that required effort is now effortless. What was once a conscious thing is now unconscious. And the way that you can do that is by constantly acting as the person you want to be. And obviously, like initially you may struggle, but if you keep going back and chipping away at it, like you keep saying, eventually through repetition, then those old habits are going to be replaced with new habits and your intentions are going to be a reflection of your desires. Here's some stuff you can do, and it's really simple, but it really helps. And ultimately, all these things are just about having congruence between your conscious mind and your unconscious mind. So the first one is something that seems simple, and it is simple, but it's very, very powerful. It's let your yes be a yes and your no be a no. This is something that Jesus said. I don't think he was saying it in the context of discipline, but either way, this is good advice. Let your yes be a yes and your no be a no. If you don't do this, then you're going to give your unconscious mind mixed signals. If you give your unconscious mind mixed signals, then you're basically programming yourself not to do what you want to do. And so, for example, if you say you're going to do something, then you don't do it, then basically what you're doing is letting your unconscious mind know that it's okay not to do the things that you say you want to do, and you become kind of wishy-washy or whatever. And more than that, it becomes a habit to tell yourself one thing and then not do it. And so ultimately what I'm saying is if you say you're going to do something, then do it. If you say you're not going to do something, then don't. It's really simple, and it has to become a habit to live in this way. And again, if it's a new habit, it might take some effort, and it probably will take some effort to get to that point. But if you keep chipping away at it, then eventually your yes will be a yes and your no will be a no, and you're going to have congruence between your unconscious and conscious mind. They're not going to be moving in different directions, and you're not going to be constantly telling your unconscious mind that you can say yes and it actually means no, thus telling it to go in this totally different direction. You're going to bring your unconscious mind and your conscious mind back onto the same page, and as long as you know where you're going, then you're going to get there, basically. If you give yourself mixed messages, then you're pulling yourself in different directions. Basically, if your yes is really a no, or you allow that to be the case, or vice versa, you're programming yourself not to do what you want. And so every time you do that, you're basically making life more difficult for yourself. And so you can start to cultivate more discipline at the level of your being, at the root cause of the problem, like this gap between the unconscious and conscious mind, by simply saying what you mean and then sticking to the promises you make to yourself. That brings us on to the next point, which is to make it a general rule, not like a concrete absolute rule, to finish what you start, even if you don't do it perfectly. Again, if you don't finish what you start, you're just giving your unconscious mind signals not to get you where you want to be. Ultimately, everything we do is giving our unconscious mind signals. And so if you start a new creative project and then you don't do it, and then you start another creative project and then you don't complete it, and again and again and again, ultimately you're just reinforcing this habit, this unconscious habit, and this identity that stems from it. You're reinforcing the idea that it's okay for you not to do what you say you want to do. And then if you live like that consistently, there's no surprise really that you're not going to get the results that you want. Because at two levels, first of all, you've told yourself that you want to do something and then you haven't done it. And then secondly, you've made that the norm. And if that's the norm and it becomes habitual, your identity ultimately becomes an extension of that. And then you just keep repeating that pattern. And so again, the effort that you need to put in is not on forcing yourself necessarily with all the little details of what you do, but just finishing what you start initially. If you can do those two things that we've talked about, let your yes be a yes, and finish what you start, which are obviously kind of related, then you're gonna up the game for yourself quite dramatically, because at the level of your being and the way that you relate to yourself, you're getting that congruence. You're deconditioning yourself from this really common habit that a lot of us have, which is that we can just say we want to do things, but then don't do it, and that becomes normal. And if that becomes normal for too long, then you're just making it really hard for you to change your life. And that's when you think you have to attack all these different symptoms of things that are showing up, like the negative self-talk and etc. All of that stuff is a reaction to you knowing deep down that you're not being true to yourself. And so if you can just make it simple and do what you say you're going to do and keep your promises to yourself, no matter how hard it is, like it's going to take effort before it becomes effortless, then you're going to be able to cultivate that discipline at quite a deep level. Obviously, there's always going to be some cases where it's worth quitting, but only when you've weighed it up consciously. So, for example, I don't know, maybe you're really interested in like getting a new job or something like that. You go to a job interview and you don't get it, and that's the end of the story, right? Like you're not going to keep calling them up and saying, "Look, I want this job," blah blah blah. Sometimes you have to quit. That was a really bad example, but the point is, there are going to be times in life when you do need to quit, but it needs to be a conscious decision that you've made to quit, not just this unconscious habit to be able to just not see things through to completion because that's just what you're so used to doing, and your identity allows you to be that way. If you can abolish that way of thinking from your life, then you're going to get the results that you want, because first of all, you're going to keep upskilling as you do finish these projects, but also you're going to develop the qualities of resilience and perseverance and blah 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 that you need to go from effort to effortless in the first place. Another thing to do is to chip away at things in increments. So this is another really important thing. Like, it's so basic that I do talk about it a lot, but ultimately it's easier than you think once you get going for you to get results. The reason that people often struggle to get results is because they give up too easily. They don't have this congruence that we're talking about where their yes is a yes and they finish things that they start. Most people who lack discipline, they have tricked themselves into thinking it's going to be way more difficult than it needs to be. But at the same time, they don't realize how easy it actually is if they're just consistent and disciplined and focused. And so an example I always use is using the law of cause and effect in a way that works for you. So working at your own pace, basically, within the context of your life and the restraints on your time and all that stuff. But do something every day. So the example I always use is writing a book. So for example, in my life right now, I'm writing a new book. Every morning I wake up, and after I've done my sun salutations and all that stuff and made some coffee, I start writing. That's it. That's my morning routine. I wake up every morning and I write. I've been doing that for this particular book since just before the start of the year. I've only probably been writing 45 minutes to an hour on average, if that. And now I've like 300 pages of this book. And it wasn't really that hard. Like, honestly, like it wasn't hard because I just got into that routine. Like 45 minutes a day is nothing. And if you do it first thing in the morning, you make space for it before everything else, then it's pretty much guaranteed that it's going to happen. And either way, whenever you do it, it just builds up. You're using the compound effect. Like ultimately, those pages have built up to state the obvious. And before I knew it, I now have basically a complete book. It's going to be another few months, given the way it's going. But anyway, the point is, it's so easy to sit down and just be disciplined in that way. The thing that stops people getting there is they look at the whole project that they're working on. They don't look at the process of just writing day by day. They look at the whole book before it's even complete, in this example, and then they never get started because they get overwhelmed. And so, if you understand that, you can start to build a discipline in increments. You don't have to do loads. You don't have to overwork yourself. You don't have to drive yourself mad. You have to put some effort in, but as long as you're using the compound effect, then day by day, you're going to get the results. And that doesn't just apply to like things like writing and like literal tangible things. If you work out every day, then you're going to ultimately keep compounding and building on the results that you're getting. And over time, those workouts are going to be an investment. So it can literally be anything. But the point is, if you're true to your word and you are aware that if you finish what you start, then you're sending yourself these signals to your unconscious mind that you're congruent and that you're just that kind of person. So you're undoing those old habits that stop you from doing that. Then you can chip away at things day by day by day, and you're just going to get results kind of blossoming in your life. And it's not as hard as people think. And if you understand that, then you can easily be more disciplined because it's just not as hard as people think. The final thing I want to talk about is keeping the fire burning. Give up immediate gratification. So a lot of the work that you need to do to be disciplined is to give up the automatic need to respond or to react even to every little impulse and instinct that pops up in your brain. If you do that, if you can train yourself not to do that, then you're going to get way more power and way more mastery over your ability to make decisions in the moment and to move in the direction that you want to go in. And so a good metaphor for this is to keep the fire burning a little bit. You don't have to put a fire of desire out as soon as it arises. As soon as you, as soon as you want to text somebody, or as soon as you want to eat something, or as soon as you want to do whatever, you can leave a little space to let it kind of burn away inside of you. Fire purifies you and it burns away the unreal stuff. And so you can keep the fire of your desire burning by not catering to every impulse right away. Some good examples or common examples are fasting and semen retention. If you're a guy, probably not a good idea to be retaining semen if you're a woman, but either way, these are just examples of why this works. Like ultimately, if you're fasting, if you're retaining your semen and you're not trying to, let's not even go there. But if you're trying to cultivate that discipline of your instincts, you get used to not having to give in to every instinct and impulse as soon as it arises. One of the main reasons that we lack discipline is because we do that. We give in to every instinct, every impulse as soon as it arises, but we don't realize that those instincts and impulses are more often than not just our old unconscious programming that's trying to pull us in that direction we don't want to be in. And so if you can do something that's hard, in yoga they call this tapas, then you can learn to resist until you find the sweet spot. You can sit with it a bit and burn your old identity up. That old unconscious identity can be kind of burned away and dissolved by learning to cultivate discipline through doing something that you don't necessarily want to do. Like with fasting, for example, the instinct is to eat, to state the obvious. If you can override that and show your body that actually your mind is in control and not your body, then you get the mastery to be able to kind of stay calm and responsive from one moment to the next, and to keep focusing on where you actually want to go and not where these unconscious patterns want to take you. And so most of the time, when we've been undisciplined and we've got all these symptoms that we talked about, like negative self-talk and procrastination and yada, 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 they're just old kind of instincts and impulses calling for our attention. And we keep feeding into them, which means they keep getting worse and worse and worse, or stronger and stronger and stronger, when actually what we need to do is learn not to feed into them so that we can feed into our real life. And so what is really recommended is to build something hard or challenging into your daily life. In yoga, they call this tapas. Tapas is just basically having some challenging difficult thing that you don't really want to do that is going to make you more disciplined, it's going to give you more endurance, it's going to give you control and mastery of your body and your mind, your emotions, and all that kind of stuff. The obvious thing to do is like yoga itself. Like, I love yoga. Like, we don't need to go into all that, but like yoga is a good example because at first you'll find that you can't do certain things, you'll be falling on your ass, you'll be doing all these different things, you'll be making a fool of yourself. But the more you keep going back to that yoga mat, the more you'll be able to do it, and the more you burn away those impurities and get control of your body, and you learn about yourself, and you can take that attitude off of the yoga mat and be able to stay disciplined and do all the things that you actually want to do, because you're no longer being driven by your unconscious desires and intentions. And so that tapas is it's related to the word fire. Ultimately, if you can learn not to give in to every instinct as it arises, obviously you don't have to go totally crazy with it, but you're going to be able to get to that point where you can respond based on who you want to become as you move across that gap, rather than just reacting based on who you think you are because of that unconscious programming and those unconscious intentions that are pulling you in a different direction. So find something you don't want to do but can enjoy doing. You'll burn away the old patterns, and when the old patterns are burned away, which are always unreal, you'll just be left with the real version of you, which is going to take you across that gap. All of this is going to make you more real. The unconscious is going to become conscious, because as you start moving forward and crossing that gap, all of the parts of yourself that you've been hiding from yourself, your strengths, your real goals, your real values, your real qualities are going to come up from the shadow self, because your ego, that unconscious identity, is going to dissolve, and so you can become free from that. And you're also going to make the conscious unconscious, in the sense of the things that you're consciously putting effort into doing are going to become something that eventually becomes effortless, because you're going to replace those old habits with new intentions, new intentions and desires, and you're going to get where you want to be. And so if you want to flow across that gap, that's how you do it. You need to align your unconscious mind with your conscious mind. You need to basically train yourself to have new habits in your relationship with yourself. Simple examples are the ones that I've given. Let your yes be a yes, and your no be a no. Finish what you start. Burn away the impurities by literally building something into your life that's going to challenge you to become more disciplined. And if you can do that, you're going to get where you need to be. So there's a question for you here. If you want to answer it, you can do so in the comments, or you can send me an email, or you can just answer it for yourself, or whatever. But what are you going to be more disciplined with now that you know this? How are you going to change the game for yourself by understanding that your relationship with yourself is ultimately the main barrier to discipline? What's your strategy for moving forward? Let me know, because I'm actually genuinely curious. This is what we talked about, basically. We talked about what discipline is, why it's important. That's so you can cross the gap. We talked about why you're struggling to be as disciplined as you know you need to be. That's because probably you're confusing the symptoms with the fundamental problem. We talked about how you have to put effort in for it to become effortless as you change those old unconscious habits. You have to let your yes be a yes, your no be a no. If you want to get this congruence, always finish what you start, build incrementally and chip away at it, and keep that fire burning by not giving in to desire immediately, or instinct or impulse, because 99% of the time, let's say, just pull that out of my ass, those instincts and impulses that are calling to you are just those old unconscious patterns anyway. And so if you can build something into the structure of your life that's going to allow you to cultivate that quality of being responsive instead of reactionary, then you're going to get where you need to be. So go get it. If you've got any questions about any of this stuff, then you can get in touch with me. You can send me a DM on Instagram. If you want to book a call, you can do so on my website. It's ollyanderson.co.uk/talk. But ultimately, discipline isn't as complicated as we think it is sometimes. If we take it down to the basics being that if we align our unconscious intentions with our conscious desires and flip the script so that what we really want is actually what's going on inside of us, what we're living as and being because of the way that we're habitually acting, then we can get where we want to be. So hope that helped you. Thank you so much for watching this. Peace to you, and hope you get where you want to be.